Thanks for joining us in this webinar on the Gender Action Plan of the Global Framework on Chemicals. My name is Mino Hemati. I'm a co-founder and associate of the MSP Institute, Multi-Stakeholder Processes for Sustainable Development. I'm supporting the work on gender and chemicals that the MSP Institute is doing. This webinar is, as I said, about the draft Gender Action Plan, or the GAP, for the new Global Framework on Chemicals, or the GFC. Do we love our acronyms? The GFC was adopted at the 5th International Conference on Chemicals Management, ICCM5, in December 2023 in Bonn. It includes gender equality as a core principle, and the resolution number V4 was also adopted, mandating the development of a gender action plan to promote gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls in chemicals and waste management. This gender action plan aims to ensure women's full participation and equal participation in decision-making and to maintain a mainstream agenda perspective in the implementation of the GFC. Quickly, by way of introduction, MSP Institute is a small charitable association based in Berlin, Germany, dedicated to supporting high-quality dialogue and collaboration among stakeholders, stakeholder participation, and good governance. We've been working on gender and chemicals since 2017 and have been active in the SAICM, now GFC process, since then. Since 2023, we also serve as the Secretariat for the Gender and Chemicals Partnership, which was launched at ICCM5. This is an international multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral partnership bringing together key stakeholders from governments, academia, civil society, and industry to address the global pollution crisis through the lens of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. We've meanwhile held our first proper assembly and created 4 working groups, including one on international policy processes such as the GFC. And we're open for new members, and one of our colleagues will put the website in the chat just now. I'm saying this also because MSP Institute was happy to sign a small-scale funding agreement with UNEP about developing the draft Gender Action Plan for the GFC. This work is done by our esteemed consultant colleague, Maria Eugenia González Anaya, who earlier played a key role in developing and negotiating the GFC gender resolution. We're doing this work in collaboration with the Gender and Chemicals Partnership. To further discuss the Gender Action Plan, this webinar involving stakeholders in implementing the GFC and its GAP is meant to begin discussing the potential elements of the plan. And if we could have the agenda. While we quickly look at the agenda, everybody is invited to introduce yourselves in the chat and say where you are from and where you are listening in from today. We will start with an opening statement by Kay Williams, head of the GFC Secretariat, followed by a presentation by Mauro González about the GFC Gender Action Plan and its draft elements. We will then invite statements from 6 stakeholder representatives, beginning with the Government of Mexico, followed by civil society, academia, an industry-focused initiative, children and youth, and the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. These are individual stakeholder contributions, not coordinated statements by stakeholder groups or major groups, unless a speaker should indicate so. Unfortunately, due to a bit of organizational rush, we were not able to include an intervention by the IOMC, but we're sure that there will be future opportunities for discussion. Plus, of course, UNEP is a member of the IOMC. We have reserved time for discussion and questions and comments, and if we're all very disciplined, this will be 20 to 30 minutes before we close with closing remarks, and there's a change in the agenda. We're going to talk about next steps and have closing remarks by Mao and myself. This webinar is being recorded, as you heard, and we will produce a summary which will be added to the respective OEWG INF document in Annex 3. So let's get started properly. It is my great pleasure to hand the floor to Kay Williams, head of the Secretariat of the Global Framework on Chemicals at the United Nations Environment Programme. When Kay was still at the UK Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, she played leading roles at negotiations for the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, the Minamata Convention, and in the SAICM Beyond 2020 process, where she served as co-chair and contributed to the development of an ambitious outcome at ICCM5. My pleasure. Over to you, Kay.
Thank you so much, Minu, for that wonderful introduction, and good day, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and thank you very much for joining us. So on behalf of the Global Framework on Chemicals Secretariat, I'm pleased to welcome you to this really key webinar on the Gender Action Plan. Absolutely delighted to see there was strong registration and interest and participation now today, and it looks like we have representatives from governments, NGOs, civil society, academia, and other parts of our global community. As has been mentioned, the framework was adopted in 2023 to help us build a safer and healthier world by reducing the harms caused by chemicals and waste. But to truly, I think, make progress in the efforts that we undertake, we have to be inclusive. Otherwise, we will not make the transformational changes that are required. So this means understanding how chemicals affect different people in different ways, and ensuring that all voices, especially those of women and maybe marginalized communities, are part of the conversation and also, importantly, part of the decision making. So for me, the Gender Action Plan and its activities are not an afterthought. They're not a secondary consideration. They have to be a key and mainstreamed part of the implementation of the framework. And we have to start thinking about gender right at the start when we create our policies and our programs, including our implementation programs, which are a key mechanism for the framework to deliver, so that we have something that's effective and fair. So today's session is hearing about where the progress that's been made. It's listening and understanding about the proposals on the table, and also to hear from you, your feedback, experiences, and ideas to help shape a plan that is not only ambitious, but also realistic, because it's important that we have something that's practical, inclusive, and grounded in reality. So thank you so much for being part of the conversation, for any work that you are doing and progressing in this area. It's really, truly appreciated. And I look forward to seeing some of you, hopefully, in the first open-ended working group of the Global Framework on Chemicals in Punta del Este, Uruguay, which is coming up in a few weeks' time. So with that, I'd like to pass the floor over back to Mino, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kay, for these opening remarks and underlining the issue of inclusion, but also the formula, ambitious and realistic. I quite like that. Thank you very much. Thanks. I'd like to now go to the presentation of the Gender Action Plan, or its draft elements as it stands right now, and introduce Maria Eugenia González Anaya, or Maru as we call her, who has over 20 years of experience in national and international negotiations, policy development, research, and consulting on environment and sustainable development, with a particular focus on gender equality, human rights, and public participation. Maru has been a lead negotiator on gender and chemicals management issues in various international forums, including the Global Framework on Chemicals, a former vice president and rapporteur of the Bureau of COP16 of the Basel Convention, as well as negotiator on the Plastics Convention. Maru is leading our work on the GFC GAP and will introduce the GFC GAP strategic objectives, potential structure, and elements just now. Over to you, Maru.
Thank you so much, Mino, for that introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you also to the Secretariat at the Green Forum and the GGKP for supporting this webinar with the MSP Institute. And thank you very much to all for joining us today. Today I have the pleasure of sharing the work the MSP Institute is undertaking on developing the GFC's Gender Action Plan in collaboration with the Secretariat. Next slide, please. It was mentioned, the ICCM5 adopted Resolution 5/4, mainstreaming a gender perspective and promoting gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls in chemicals and waste management, which requests the Secretariat to develop a gender action plan for consideration by the conference at its next session. The Gender Action Plan represents a crucial step toward integrating gender perspectives and gender-responsive policies and actions into chemical and waste management processes. This responds to the growing recognition that exposure to chemicals and waste significantly impacts human health and disproportionately affects people in vulnerable situations, particularly women and children. Moreover, we know that gender equality can support the sound management of chemicals and waste. In the following slides, we aim to share the results of our work that follow a structured roadmap involving the review of existing frameworks, stakeholder consultations and engagement, and the development of strategic objectives and actions that are now included in the draft document of the Gender Action Plan. The next one, please. We structure our work in three primary phases, starting with a call for information launched by the Secretariat in October 2024. This follow of a review of existing information consisting of gender action plans and submissions and the identification of elements of the potential elements of the gender action plan for the GFC. The second phase consisted of consultations with experts and gender focal points and several meetings with the Secretariat to finalize the document that you have access to already. And the final phase includes integrating comments during the open-ended working group, as well as any feedback we may receive during this meeting and in the next weeks, and in writing contributions that the Secretariat may receive in the upcoming months prior to its approval at the next conference. The next one, please. The starting point of our work was reviewing existing gender action plans. We identify best practices, challenges, and gaps within the gender action plans from MEAs relevant to the global framework on chemicals, such as the BRS, Minamata, the UNFCCC, and the CBD. And we also include the efforts on gender and chemicals management from the cycle. We have the opportunity to review information from WHO, ILO, UNEP and its policy and strategy for gender equality, information from UN Women, the IOMC and UNDP, as well as reports from the Human Rights Council, especially from the Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights. We review mandates and frameworks within the UN system, including the GEF policy on gender equality and the UN system-wide action plan on gender equality and the empowerment of women. Our analysis also included 24 submissions from governments and stakeholders. These submissions included suggestions and potential principles, objectives, and actions to be considered in the gender action plan. Following, please. Following this analysis, we were able to identify practices and challenges within the gaps, but overall, there are substantial evidence of ongoing positive efforts within the chemicals cluster instruments and the different agencies carrying out activities related to health, labor, and their relation with chemicals and waste management and gender equality. From all this information and the input from governments and stakeholders, we identified good practices and progress made or being made, in particular regarding legislation, regulations, capacity building, and planning and implementation of gender-focused projects. This information led us to identify relevant elements for the Gender Action Plan. The next one. We identify persistent elements that we deem important to include in the action plan, such as robust scientific knowledge on gender disaggregated data, capacity building and gender-sensitive education, gender-responsive policy development, including laws, regulations, and institutional frameworks, multi-stakeholder engagement and gender-inclusive leadership at all levels, gender mainstreaming in strategic planning, monitoring, and evaluation, health and safety policies that address gender exposure risk, and transparent communication and accountability mechanisms. The following, please. We conclude that effective gender mainstreaming within the global framework of chemicals requires elements aligned with 5 strategic objectives of the global framework on chemicals and support coherence and systematic gender integration across the implementation programs. These elements are gender equality, gender impacts, intersectional approach, stakeholder participation, flexibility, collaboration, strategic priorities, clear implementation. Then I have to tell you that the review of all the existing information, the gender action plans, and the submissions from governments and stakeholders will be available in the GFC website for discussion during the open-ended working group. And the submissions, everything will be posted as an annex to the INF document. Next one. The vision of the Gender Action Plan is to promote the full and meaningful integration of gender perspectives across all aspects of the GFC, ensuring that chemical and waste management policies and actions protect and empower all people, regardless of gender. The action plan aims to contribute to a planet free of harm from chemicals and waste, where no individual faces disproportionate risk or barriers due to gender, by promoting gender-responsive policies, equitable participation, and targeted actions. Due to its cross-cutting nature, the Gender Action Plan is designed to hold the Secretariat, governments, and all the stakeholders accountable for its implementation as appropriate. Next slide. The Gender Action Plan is coherent with the 5 strategic objectives of the Global Framework on Chemicals and follows that structure. In the draft document, you will find a table with 5 strategic objectives and the respective set of activities. You will find columns with the alignment with the strategic objective of the Global Framework on Chemicals and its targets, alignment with the 3 implementation programs, identification of responsible stakeholders, indicators of achievement, means of verification, priority, timelines, and potential funding and cooperation or coordination. Next one. This next slide is an example on how each objective of the Gender Action Plan looks like. As I mentioned before, there are columns and identifying the activities for each strategic objective, which is related to the strategic objectives of the GFC. And you will see indicators of achievement, means of verification, the prioritization, and all the relation to the implementation programs. Next one. And this slide resumes all the actions for each of the 5 strategic objectives. It is a lot of information, but I will try to briefly go through each of one. The first strategic objective refers to gender inclusive legal frameworks. This objective includes 3 actions aimed to developing and implementing gender sensitive policies, strengthening stakeholder capacity to integrate gender considerations into chemical and waste regulations, and promoting also self-compliance models that improve working conditions and advance gender equality in high-risk sectors. The second strategic objective is that gender disaggregated knowledge, data, and information are generated, made available and accessible to all to inform decisions and actions. And this objective includes 4 specific actions to strengthen the evidence base on gender impacts of chemicals and waste by collecting and reporting gender disaggregated data, conducting gender impact assessments across key sectors, implementing surveys on occupational exposure and health outcomes, and identifying policy gaps to inform targeted actions. The third strategic objective relates to integrating gender-responsive approaches in identifying, prioritizing, and addressing issues of concern. And two actions for this objective aim to assess and strengthen capacities to integrate gender perspective through all this process of issues of concern, including during the planning and implementation of related programs and projects. The fourth strategic objective relates to safer alternatives and innovative and sustainable solutions in product value chains. And these include three specific actions to advance research on gender-specific health and occupational risk from chemical exposure, integrate gender perspective in the development of safer alternatives, and promote access to gender-relevant information to support informed consumer choices. And finally, the last strategic objective is improve integration on gender perspectives across the GFC implementation. And there are 6 specific actions toward strengthening gender mainstreaming through capacity building, gender balanced leaderships, and awareness raising, designate gender focal points, and promote collaboration with MEAs, UN agencies, and partnerships, resource mobilization for gender responsive initiatives, and ensure inclusive engagement in all decision-making processes. The next slide. I'm about to finish. The last slides reflect some of the challenges that we have identified in the review of information and that we have to acknowledge in the implementation of the Gender Action Plan. And we identified some challenges on data and monitoring. There's lack of gender disaggregated data and reporting mechanisms across MEAs and UN bodies. And there's a need of harmonized indicators on to track progress on gender equality in chemicals management. Regarding funding, there is a heavy dependency on voluntary contributions that limits the scalability of gender responsive initiatives, and there's a need for sustained financial mechanisms. Also, we identified women's leadership and joint leadership of women and men as a challenge, more participation in all decision-making processes. Next one. Limited participation in decision-making processes for targeted capacity building and awareness programs to enhance women's leadership, and cooperation of the voices of youth, indigenous peoples, labor, and health sectors. We also see that the strategic frameworks need clear strategic objectives, and there is a need to align activities, actions with initiatives, and as possible, avoid duplication. There's important to find collaboration among sectors, among stakeholders, among governments, among regions, and among secretariats of MEAs that are relevant to the implementation of the GFC. And finally, strengthen the capacity of all stakeholders to integrate gender perspectives through training and resource development, encourage multi-stakeholder engagement, including women's organizations and grassroots groups. And with this, I will conclude. There's another slide with next steps that maybe we can leave to the end, but we will keep these discussions in the following months. We hope we can keep this discussing this first draft during the meeting of the open-ended working group in Uruguay. And with that, I conclude my intervention. I welcome any comments or questions either on the chat or after the presentations. And over to you, Minu. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maru, for this very systematic and concise presentation of a complex matter in a very short period of time. So everybody, if you have questions or comments, please hold them or share them in the chat or hold them for the discussion time that we have allotted here. So thanks again, Maru, for getting us up to speed with a summary of the document that I hope everybody has, of course, studied before this webinar. I'd also like to acknowledge that we have 106 colleagues who have joined us now, and that's wonderful. Welcome to everybody, and thanks for your interest in this particular important topic. We turn now to the statements from stakeholders, beginning with governments, and I take questions and comments after the interventions, just to make clear. So we begin with Miriam Medel Garcia. I'm honored and delighted to have you here. I'd like to introduce you briefly. Since September 2024, Miriam leads the work related to the environment and global health issues at the Permanent Mission of Mexico to the UN and other international organizations based in Geneva. In that capacity, she recently negotiated on behalf of Mexico the pandemic treaty at the WHO and is in charge of issues related to chemical pollution and biodiversity conservation. A career diplomat of over 20 years, she has extensive experience in climate change and other sustainable development processes, having also held leadership positions within the UNFCCC and the UNCCD Secretariat. And I'd like to add that Miriam is also serving on the board of the Gender and Chemicals Partnership. With that, over to you, Miriam.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minu, Maru, and everybody. It's really a pleasure for me to be here, especially because it seems like a very important milestone of the journey that we have been following with regards to the Gender Action Plan for the Global Chemical Framework. I will speak a little bit on the priorities that my government has on this issue. For us, it couldn't be more fitting for us to try to support the work because it speaks directly to our national values and our international commitments. As some of you may know, gender equality is at the cornerstone in our public policy and also in our diplomacy. In 2020, Mexico became the first developing country to adopt a feminist foreign policy grounded in human rights, intersectionality, and the transformation of unequal power structures that I have seen many people in the chat already referring to. For us, this approach guides our engagement in all multilateral processes, as it did, for example, with the pandemic treaty that we recently negotiated, and including this one. Mexico, it was also almost natural that we adopted this feminist foreign policy because we have a long-standing trajectory in promoting gender equality in global environmental governance. We hosted the first World Conference on Women in 1975. Almost 50 years ago, we actively contributed to shape the Beijing Platform for Action in 1995. We supported resolutions on gender and chemicals under the base of Rotterdam Stockholm Convention and the Global Framework on Chemicals. And we have consistently championed the integration of a gender perspective in UNFCCC, UNCCD, biodiversity, and the majority of environmental multilateral agreements where we belong. In recent years, we have advanced domestic policies and interministerial collaboration to ensure gender is mainstream in both climate and chemical management agendas. And the efforts, fortunately, are not isolated as because they are part of a coherent national and international strategy. And it's always I always like to ask people, why do we do all this multilaterally? Because it impacts back at home and because we can then put it back into our own policy development. We are convinced, Mexico is convinced that the Gender Action Plan is not just a technical annex, it is a political and ethical imperative. It is a tool to correct systemic gaps and to bring visibility to the unequal burdens that women, especially those in vulnerable and marginalized contexts, as Kai was referring to, continue to face when it comes to chemical exposure and environmental health. From Mexico's own experience, there are three reflections that we thought we may support the development of this action plan. First, data and education must come first. So our work on gender and climate taught us that we cannot address what we do not measure. And this has become very, very evident when we have conversations with a lot of stakeholders with regards to the chemical gender action plan. Collecting sex disaggregated data on chemical exposure and creating gender-sensitive educational materials are essential. Women, girls, boys often lack access to basic information about the risks they face, especially in sectors like cleaning, agriculture, or informal recycling work. If we want policies to be effective, then all peoples, all stakeholders must be informed by the reality that they live, that these groups live. And that is why under the GFC objectives B4 and B5, Mexico strongly advocates for targeted training programs and awareness campaigns. So that's number one. Number two, gender must be built into the regulatory backbone of our countries. We have seen the power of institutional mechanisms. Our Gender Action Plan on Climate Change, for example, includes interdisciplinary task forces, monitoring framework, and long-term strategies across ministries and sectors. This same model can and should be applied to chemicals. So the objective A1 of the GFC action plan calls for gender inclusive legal frameworks. So we really hope that we are not going to miss the opportunity to integrate gender from the ground up, not as a box to tick, but as a structural principle in everything that we do, which once it is adopted in 2026, when we bring it back home for regulation, when we also inform our bilateral relations or cooperation programs with other countries, and most of all, internally when developing policy, as I already said. And then third, meaningful participation is non-negotiable. So around the world, women and girls are not only victims of environmental harm, they are also leaders in resilience, innovation, and community care. We must guarantee their full and equal participation in decision-making processes from the grassroots to the global level. That includes indigenous women, young women, women workers, and women scientists. And we support all efforts to ensure gender-balanced leadership through the implementation of the GFC. And I mean, I'm referring specifically to women when gender is, of course, about more than women. It's about actually everybody. But as we know, the impacts of the chemical pollution are differentiated, and the historical imbalances are also differentiated. So that's why the emphasis we're putting right now on this is on women and girls. To conclude, I want to acknowledge that the moment we are in, because this is probably more difficult than 1 year ago when everything when you all started in this process. I joined much later, but I'm very happy to be part of this group. Around the world, we are seeing backlash against gender rights and environmental protection. In this context, the Gender Action Plan, as I said before, is more than a technical document. It is a political statement that says that we will not go backwards. We need to be ambitious, we need to be bold, and we need to ensure that the global framework on chemicals delivers not only a safer and cleaner planet, but a planet that is more just and more inclusive for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria, for this statement, for the 3 points and the priorities you mentioned, but also, of course, for that clear and bold statement about this not being a technical afterthought, but a political and ethical imperative. Thank you very much for this strong statement. Right after the government perspective, we have an intervention from a civil society perspective, and we're happy to welcome Tripti Arora. Tripti is the Gender and South Asia Regional Coordinator of the International Pollutants Elimination Network, IPEN, based at Toxics Link in New Delhi. With over a decade of experience in research, advocacy, and policy engagement on chemicals and waste, TRIPT works to integrate gender perspectives into global and regional chemical safety frameworks. Her efforts focus on promoting women's leadership, addressing gender-differentiated health impacts, and supporting inclusive, science-based policy reforms. Welcome to this forum, TRIPT. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Minu, for that welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I would first like to thank the Global Framework on Chemicals Secretariat, MSP Institute, and the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership for organizing this very timely and important session on Gender Action Plan. So I'm Tripti Arora. I'm the coordinator, gender coordinator in the South Asia Regional Coordinator at IPEN. And today I'm sharing IPEN's reflection on the Gender Action Plan and how we believe we can further strengthen it to ensure meaningful gender justice in chemical management. So a little bit about IPEN. We are a global network and we work across regions and policy levels to link local realities with global decision making. We are in 130 countries and with over 600 NGOs. And gender has always been very central to our advocacy because women, girls, and gender diverse individuals, especially those in informal or frontline roles, are disproportionately impacted by chemicals and waste, and yet they are very rarely included in the decision-making process. A little bit about our report. So we did our report in 2021 on women, chemicals, and SDGs, and I think it helped inform the development of the Gender Action Plan that we have right now. And the report basically highlights how women and girls are uniquely exposed to harmful chemicals at home, workplaces, and even through the products that they use or the environment that they are in. And the report also analyzes all of the earlier SciChem's emerging policy issues that were there. And it showcased how gender and sex disaggregated impacts, and it offers actionable recommendations that can guide improvements. So let me begin by commending the MSP Institute and Global Framework on Chemicals Secretariat for this excellent work on the draft Gender Action Plan that we have. The integration across the 5 strategic objectives and recognition of the need for inclusive partnership, data, and capacity building are very welcome. And I think it reflects a significant step forward in embedding gender consideration within global chemical policy. So some of the IPEN suggestions are basically aligning it with more binding human rights framework. So it can reference CEDAW, ESCASO agreement, and maybe other UN guiding principles on human rights to strengthen coherence and accountability. Maybe the vision can be a little bit broader to include gender justice, recognizing how it's a fundamental right, and addressing structural power dynamics that shape differential exposures. We can also expand the objectives to include clear mechanisms for inclusive participation of marginalized groups, systematic gender integration in national and sectoral laws, and dedicated and predictable financing for gender responsive actions. We can also further ensure that the civil society is meaningfully engaged throughout the process. So it can institutionalize participation of grassroots women's group, indigenous communities, persons with disabilities, and LGBTQ voices, not just in consultations, but also in governance. It can enhance further the public awareness and consumer protection component by supporting tailored community education programs for girls and women, especially around reproductive, maternal health, or occupational risks. We can also promote gender-aware product labeling, especially on the products that are targeted towards particular gender, like personal care products or even food packaging and other household products that with known health impacts. On policy and data, I think strengthening gender integration into policy and data system would be quite beneficial. So requiring gender-specific impact assessments of chemicals, IOC, or other chemicals which are of high concern, for example, EDCs, PFAS, or microplastics, and supporting the development of model national laws and regulations to guide implementation of gender-responsive policies grounded in inclusive multi-stakeholder consultation. So I think I'm going to emphasize quite a bit about multi-stakeholder consultations in my talk. and also embed gender responsive budgeting. So it can encourage development of budgeting tools at both international and national levels. And fund allocation can also be tracked using smart indicators such as percentage of funding directed to women-led initiatives or percentage of gender balanced governance bodies. So we can ensure that gender is meaningfully reflected in GFC funded projects, including dedicated funding support for women-led organizations, particularly in low and middle income countries. So in conclusion, IPEN supports the GAP's vision and urges just certain recommendations to make it stronger and more effective. So it can be more inclusive and adequately resourced implementation, and it can be institutionalized multi-stakeholder participation with civil society leadership and engagements, not just in principle, basically at its core, and throughout, from design, implementation to monitoring throughout the process. And also full integration into gender equality into national plans, governance structures, and funding decisions. So just going through the gender action plans, I was thinking that as also it was shared earlier by Maria, what are the challenges? So we know that a lot of challenges are going to arise. So maybe having that inbuilt, what tools we can build, what guidance we can provide, what models we can create could also be very helpful to further tackle the challenges that we are already anticipating. So overall, we would like to say that it's a really wonderful step in action, and IPEN would love for the process to be multi-stakeholder engagement with everybody, including civil society at all levels of implementation. And we think it has the potential to develop more tools, models, guidance to ensure implementation, not at the global level, but also at the national levels where these laws actually have to be developed and implemented. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to share our thoughts and reflections. Looking forward to seeing you at OEWG1, hopefully. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tripti, for this very positive and constructive feedback. I've seen Maru taking copious notes. Thanks very much for these concrete, specific suggestions to further improve it and strengthen it, possibly. And thanks very much for IPEN's engagement in this, given that you have a few hundred organizations as members, it means a lot. Thank you very much, Tripti, for your intervention. Also, you said that you had originally prepared a PowerPoint presentation. If you could share that with the team, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. With that, we'd like to turn to a voice and perspective from academia and research institutions. Our next speaker is Sharika Whitelock-Ballingsing, the Poison Information Coordinator for the Caribbean Poison Information Network, located at the University of Technology in Jamaica. Sharika is a public health inspector by training with over 20 years experience tackling public health issues. Her education and specialist background are public health at the international level, medical toxicology, education, and training. She works both in the public sector and academic institutions, focusing primarily on poison through chemicals. She has a passion for public health and protecting the vulnerable population from poisoning, and is an ardent advocate for policies to protect human health against poisonous exposure, both in Jamaica and in the wider Caribbean. And we are happy that Sharika is also serving on the board of the Gender and Chemicals Partnership. We're looking forward to your intervention. Over to you, Sharika.
Thank you, Minu. A moderator, panelists, supporting partners, the Secretariat, and participants, good time of day. The Global Framework on Chemical calls for a gender action plan, which aims to advance the achievement of Sustainable Development Goal 5 and implement the Economic and Social Council's conclusion 1997/2. This includes the need to mainstream a gender perspective as emphasized in UNEA Assembly Resolution 4/17. Systematically collecting and analyzing gender disaggregated data related to chemical exposure is essential for understanding the different impacts of such exposure on different genders. This process involves gathering detailed information about the types and levels of chemicals to which individuals are exposed, categorized by gender. A comprehensive approach will enable researchers to identify patterns and trends in chemical exposure, thereby fostering a deeper understanding of how biological and social factors impact health outcomes. By analyzing this data, we can better assess vulnerability and risk, ensuring that both men and women are considered in public health policies and interventions aimed at reducing harmful chemical exposures. The varying levels of exposures to chemicals between genders, they're not merely a statistical observation. They have profound implication for health outcomes. They demand urgent attention. Men and women are exposed to different environmental and occupational hazards, resulting in significant discrepancies in how chemical substances affect their bodies. For instance, research highlights that women may be more vulnerable to the adverse effects of endocrine disruptors, given their unique hormonal cycles. This heightening susceptibility can result in severe health consequences, including reproductive issues and increased rates of certain disease. On the other hand, men often face greater exposure to hazardous chemicals in various industries, heightening their risk of developing respiratory illnesses and reproductive health complications. The importance of collecting and analyzing gender disaggregated data on chemical exposure cannot be overstated. By carefully gathering and examining data that distinguishes between genders, we uncover critical insights into how chemical exposure uniquely impacts different populations. This approach not only highlights variation in exposure levels and health outcomes, but also reveals the underlying social and biological factors at play. Understanding these dynamics is important for developing effective public health policies and intervention strategies that protect everyone, regardless of gender. By prioritizing a data-driven approach, we can strive for a future with equitable health outcomes, ensuring that both men and women are adequately safeguarded against the risk associated with harmful chemical exposure. We need to recognize that informed decisions rely on comprehensive, gender-sensitive research. Recognizing these gender-specific differences is vital for shaping effective public health policies. We must advocate for risk assessments that considers these disparities, ensuring that both men and women receive the tailored protection they need from harmful chemical exposure. By addressing these critical gender-based health issues, we can now pave the way for a healthier future for all. Thank you for having me presenting, Minu.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sharika, also for outlining how important the Gender Action Plan is for researchers and how important the knowledge is that can be generated through gender-sensitive research for policies and for more justice in our societies. Thank you very much for this perspective from an academic and research background. We'll turn to a private sector and industry perspective now and give a warm welcome to our next speaker, Alexandra McPherson, Director of the Investor Environmental Health Network for Clean Production Action. Through the Investor Environmental Health Network, Alexandra, or Ellie, provides expertise, guidance, and counsel to investors on engagement strategies that positively impact corporate behavior on chemical footprinting, more sustainable and safer chemistry innovations, and environmental justice. She leverages her deep competency in communications and partnership development to build multi-stakeholder initiatives that motivate change and investment in environmental solutions critical to chemical pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change. Very happy to have you. Ali, over to you.
Thank you. And I'm deeply honored to be here to support the Global Framework on Chemicals Gender Action Plan, and I'm extremely grateful for the leadership driving this initiative forward. So as the director of the Investor Environmental Health Network for Clean Production Action, I really sit at the intersection of investment, business, and advocacy to accelerate the transition to safer chemicals. And centering women's health is essential to our work. And we really see the case for urgency growing, particularly the evidence mounting on the disproportionate harm hazardous chemicals pose to women, particularly young women. Recently, The Economist just featured an article on the alarming rate and and the increase in breast cancer among younger women, pointing to toxic chemical exposure as a key contributor. And so from our perspective, from a market-based perspective, there's a real business case for this, and the Gender Action Plan really rightly acknowledges that gender equity must be foundational to sustainable chemical management. And so what I wanted to do is just share a few tools, data-driven solution tools that we use to really try to drive change in the marketplace. Clean Production Action has the Chemical Footprint Project and the Green Screen for Safer Chemicals. And both of these tools and platforms are already being used by companies and investors to identify and eliminate harmful chemicals. And we think that they could be, good inputs for this action plan as well, because they really embed human health and environmental key performance indicators that could inform how this action plan does implementation and really prioritizing actions targeting chemicals that are, most harmful to women. And so I just want to share how some of those tools are being woven into gender inclusive governance, as well as safer chemical innovation, and looking at sort of the gender inclusive governance and sort of where we see laws and regulations, either falling short or, starting to strengthen their focus on women's health, particularly in the US, because it's really critical to move markets. We need better laws. And at the federal level in the United States, while there's always been reference to vulnerable populations, the Toxic Substance Control Act, laws governing occupational health and safety, they've really fallen short in addressing gender differentiated health outcomes. So there's been advocates calling for a stronger focus on endocrine disrupting chemicals, impacts on menstruation and fertility, and racial and gender-based environmental justice. And I just wanted to put out a few examples because at the state level, there's been a response to these calls for action. So Washington State, for example, has one of the strongest toxic-free chemical cosmetic acts, and they're taking action to ban PFAS, formaldehyde in personal care products targeted towards women. California has Prop 65 and the Green Chemistry Initiative. Both have driven reformulation of products, particularly on chemicals that cause reproductive harm. And then states like Vermont, Maine, New York have all taken action to address PFAS, particularly in menstruational products. So these could be models for the policy side of this action plan. And then also, doing a landscape assessment of where best practice exists would be really helpful for the marketplace. And then I also wanted to touch base on safer, equitable value chains, and what, we see some, critical action sectorally. And I was, happy to see that the agricultural sector was focused in there. And we do a lot of work with investors on driving the shift away from harmful pesticides with known risks to human health or women's health. We also think that there could be an opportunity to focus in on the retail and personal care sector. This is really addressing companies that are selling products that women use. And so again, back to the Chemical Footprint Project, we see companies like Reckitt and Walmart reducing their chemical footprint and driving the transition to safer chemistries. We also see major initiatives like groups like Chem Forward with a Know Better, Do Better collaborative, where Sephora, Ulta, Dow are all working together to transition to chemicals that are verified to be safer for women in personal care products. So there's a lot of momentum, and we really see the ambitions of this plan critical, but there's also like a lot of work to do. And hopefully some of these tools and resources can help accelerate and scale change. And I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ellie, for these insights and also the concrete examples on the one hand from different states in the US, but also what companies are doing. And I've noted this term safer and equitable value chains and the suggestion to maybe even hone in on specific sectors in the gender action plan to make it as concrete as possible, and also be an enabler for sharing these examples across the globe. So thank you very much. If you do have notes, I think we'd maybe love to have them to further the work on the summary and the revision of the draft plan. Thank you very much. We turn to another stakeholder group, and that's children and youth, extremely important and having grown a lot over the last few years, particularly in the chemicals processes. And we welcome Shannon Lisa, who serves as the global focal point of the Chemicals and Waste Youth platform. This platform is the largest coordination space for children, youth, and youth-led organizations around the world working on chemicals, waste, and pollution, now with over 2,000 members across more than 150 countries. Collectively, they amplify the health, rights, and priorities of young people in intergovernmental and multi-stakeholder negotiations on pollution, including the GFC, the Minamata Convention, and the BRS conventions. Outside of the platform, Shannon works as a toxic detective in an environmental engineering firm supporting communities who live in the shadow of industrial chemical dumping through research, data collection, and helping shape policy solutions. Great to see you again, Shannon. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mino, for the introduction and for the opportunity to share the youth perspective on the Gender Action Plan. And another big thank you to the GFC Secretariat, MSP Institute, and the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership for convening this important dialogue. As Mino so kindly introduced, my day job is spent investigating chemical contamination sites around the world, and I've come to recognize the gender dimensions of environmental health risks firsthand. 9 times out of 10 since beginning this work, if I didn't bring my own custom personal protective equipment or PPE to the field when collecting samples of unknown and likely hazardous materials, the standard PPE easily available to me wouldn't be close to the right size or fit for my body, with too long sleeves that hung past my hands, coverall pants that bunched at my ankles, and hard hats that were constantly slipping over my eyes. Even when you know and are actively trying to protect yourself from hazardous chemicals, your safety is only as strong as the systems and standards designed to protect you. And we know that so many people don't have the privilege of access to information or knowing what they're being exposed to. Beyond this toxic detective work, as Mino mentioned, I'm honored to serve in a voluntary capacity as the global focal point for the Chemicals and Waste Youth platform. We launched in 2021 as an independent, self-organized coordination of youth organizations that are accredited to the BRS conventions, Minamata Convention on Mercury, and SciCam, which is now the Global Framework on Chemicals. And we have an even broader membership of children and youth individuals and grassroots organizations. As a rights holder constituency, the Chemicals and Waste Youth Platform's advocacy naturally intersects and has been mutually supported by other rights holders constituencies, NGOs, and networks that are focused on gender, including MSP Institute and the Gender and Chemicals Partnership. During ICCM5, CWIP co-sponsored Resolution V4 and worked closely with other stakeholders to develop proposed texts and successfully advocate for the adoption of Target B7, which addresses data disaggregation by both sex and age, as well as other demographic factors. And since ICCM5, we have continued to promote both gender and youth responsive capacity building and implementation activities relevant to the GFC and the chemicals MEAs, including by developing a dedicated youth working group on gender and chemicals, contributing to the Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights report on gender and toxics, and mobilizing youth voices for Global Mercury Partnership campaigns related to gender, colorism, and hazardous cosmetics. The draft Gender Action Plan presented today is a thorough and accountability and transparency focused framework, and we commend the MSP Institute, the Gender and Chemicals Partnership, and the GFC Secretariat for their hard work in developing it and prioritizing inclusive and equitable chemicals and waste management. And we think 3 overarching dimensions are helpful to organize the plan around, especially the introductory and vision paragraphs, and Goal E, which addresses partnerships and cooperation. The first is gender and socioeconomic dynamics. addressing gender roles and expectations that shape who is exposed to different chemicals in different contexts, who has a voice in decision-making, and who is represented in leadership. The second is gender and risk, recognizing those biological and physiological differences in how chemicals are absorbed, processed, and impact human health. And the third is gender and intersectional factors, ensuring that the Gender Action Plan centers other identities and factors of marginalization that compound vulnerability, such as age or youth and children, poverty, racial, ethnic identity, and colorism. And to share some early recommendations from our side, we appreciate children and youth groups specifically being named as a responsible actor in Goal E4 on raising awareness. And we would also like to see its inclusion and the connection between gender and broader rights holder groups more prominently across the plan, including in Goal E3 on gender balanced representation and leadership, listing rights holder groups in addition to stakeholders in some of the goals we think would strengthen this. And following this point and linked to the intersectional factors I mentioned, we would also like to see the GFC Gender Action Plan go a step further than other existing plans by not defaulting to focusing on gender disparities and gender-specific risks solely to adults or non-youth. And at the same time, it's important to avoid only grouping children's health under women's and reproductive health that limits the consideration, while important, to pregnancy, developing fetuses, and very young infants. Being deliberate about this scoping is consistent with the V4 resolution that calls for promoting gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls, and having youth speak on their own behalf about the gendered impacts they face. And finally, many current indicators in the Gender Action Plan track the number of activities, for example, the number of trainings, campaigns, or policies created. We think it would be great to incorporate additional qualitative but trackable indicators, focusing on how outcomes were improved and capturing the quality, depth, or real-world impact of gender and chemicals activities. And our constituency would be happy to make a few proposals for these points in writing. And I'll wrap up by reflecting that this work is far from just being a feel-good thing to do, or as Miriam had said, not just a box to tick because other frameworks and MEAs have gender action plans. We think the success and longevity of the GFC itself depends upon listening to and evening the playing field for all of the most impacted people and communities, and ensuring that equality is embedded across all implementation activities. And as children and youth, we look forward to working with each of you to address these shared goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Again, very concrete thoughts and suggestions for the further development of the plan. I again see Mara taking notes, and yes, your offer of forwarding your notes and what you just used is highly appreciated. Also liked the way you introduced and mentioned again children and youth as a rights holder constituency, not just stakes, but rights. Thank you very much for your contribution. Our, for the moment, last contribution from stakeholder perspectives comes from the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. And I'd like to very warmly welcome Ana Paula de Souza, Human Rights Officer at the Environment and Climate Change Unit at the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. Ana Paula has been working at the office for the past 15 years in different areas in Geneva and in Santiago. Since 2022, she coordinates the office's work on pollution and represents the office in several processes, including the BRS Corps, Minamata, INC, the OEWG, and the Science Policy Panel, ICCM, and UNEA. With that, over to you, Anna.
Can you hear me well, Minu? Yes, good. I was having problems with my audio, so I'm like relieved. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure being here and seeing now the final draft. We were part of the process of consultation, so well done for all those involved. But I would like to start by stating the obvious, and I think this has already been highlighted by several of the panelists that came before me. Gender equality is a human right and a necessary foundation for sustainable development. As mentioned by the Secretary General on 8 March, in times when women's rights are under attack, we must stand firm and take action to secure women's full participation in decision-making. The GFC calls for its implementation to be guided by 8 principles and approaches, including human rights, groups in vulnerable situations, and gender equality. This is justified on the basis that the sound management of chemicals and waste contributes to the full enjoyment of human rights, that exposure disproportionately affects people in vulnerable situations, and that women are agents of change to addressing these issues. The resolution that mandated the GAP emphasized the importance of gender mainstreaming to further promoting gender equality and the rights and empowerment of all women and girls to ensure the effective implementation of the framework and the needs to address gender differentiated impacts of chemical exposure. Yet, apart from one reference in the introduction, the draft is silent about human rights and intersectionality. Gender equality is at the very heart of human rights, and yet we know that women and girls, especially those in already vulnerable situations, are amongst the most exposed to toxic chemicals. The disproportionate and gendered impacts is why human rights-based and gender-responsive approaches are crucial to the sound management of chemicals and waste. While I welcome the draft before us as a good, very good and solid pathway to strengthen gender-responsive action, I would like to offer some reflections from a human rights perspective. 1. While women's inclusion and equitable participation is the foundation of ensuring their rights and effective environmental action, women, especially young women, are largely excluded from decision-making. This is why it's important to ensure that the GAP takes an approach that genuinely enhances women's leadership and does not create tokenistic mechanisms of participation. The GAP should strengthen requirements for participation of women as agents of change by establishing clear standards for equitable participation in decision-making processes. These should include specific mechanisms for consultation with women at all levels, regardless of their socioeconomic status or other factors, and increasing training. It should also ensure the access to information of women and girls, organizations and networks, and equal access to resources, services, and technologies, as mentioned, for example, in the CBD GAP 2023 update. While we welcome the inclusion of gender disaggregated data, the GAP must go further and include gender disaggregated by sex, age, disability, ethnicity, and region. Looking at women only from one prism of their identity limits the analysis of statistics. Such data should be made publicly available and used to inform gender-responsive national legislations, policies, programs, and budgets. The GAP should develop, on the basis of disaggregated data, specific and gender-responsive indicators and monitoring mechanisms to enable governments and other stakeholders to establish baselines and measure progress in areas such as participation of women, for example. Institutions should also reinforce capacities to collect, consolidate, and analyze the disaggregated data. 3, we are concerned by the lack of references to intersectional discrimination in the draft, although this theme came very clear from in the presentation that Malu did at the beginning of this event. A human rights-based approach includes considering not only impacts on individuals, but the inequities affecting persons and groups that suffer disproportionate impacts. Women and girls face discriminations in all spheres of their lives, but the impacts are different from those who face intersecting forms of discrimination, including indigenous women and girls of African descent, and in marginalized communities. This is why the GAP should promote work on the intersections between gender, chemicals and waste, human rights, and social justice issues. Intersectionality is an evolving concept, and the GAP should ensure that there is no backsliding on the recognition of special vulnerabilities. In comparison, we see that the 2023 GAP of the Minamata Convention and the BRS GAP's 2023 update includes references to women and girls in all their diversity. 4, the GAP should address areas where women and girls face disproportionate impacts, including by making specific references to their rights to health and to a healthy environment. Women's bodies and reproductive health are particularly susceptible to chemical exposure, for example. Rates of painful but underdiagnosed reproductive disease are rising globally, women are often working with hazardous chemicals, such as in the electronics and waste management sector. They are also exposed to chemicals through the consumption of menstrual products and skin lightening creams, for example. The list of gender impacts can go on and on. This is why human rights-based approaches must be explicitly included in any gap. 5, and that's my last point. OHR stands ready to collaborate to strengthen a human rights and gender responsive approach to the GFC and contribute to the overall implementation of the GAP, particularly activities A1 and A2. So if you like to add our names there, please feel free to do so. And with that, I'd like just to thank you again for convening this important space of discussion just weeks before we all meet in Punta del Este. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ana Paula. Clear voice for strengthening human rights and intersectionality in the Gender Action Plan, and also very concrete suggestions on how to do that. If you do have notes that you can share, we highly appreciate it. Also, thank you, and also the youth group earlier for volunteering to be listed as responsible for implementation in the table that has been created in the GAP. That's also highly appreciated. So we now have about 18 minutes left. So we say maybe we have 10, 15 minutes for questions and answers. First, let me say that a multi-stakeholder meeting like this is always impresses me, not just with the diversity, but the richness of concrete contributions. So I'd really like to thank the speakers for coming with a rich and diverse suggestions and examples, and the willingness to further cooperate on this. We do have time for questions, as I said, and I'd like you to raise your hand and or put your question in the chat. And when you do speak, please introduce yourself with your name and where you're from, and then be as brief and to the point as you possibly can so that we have a bit of time. If it's a question to a particular speaker or about Maru's presentation of the draft GAP, please let us know. I'm also inviting speakers who have made statements just now to come in should you wish to respond to something that has been said or comment on a statement that somebody else made. Now, I'm looking at the Q&A window, and there's a question by Ram Charitrashsa. I apologize. I think this is around the question of non-binary persons' exposure and impact. But we could also take your question. And I'm wondering how I do that. I need help from Karen, who's managing the meeting. Can we have the two people who have raised their hands in the first one to be given the floor, or is that not possible? Well,
Ram, can you check?
Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. What's your name? Where are you? What's your question?
Thank you. I am Ram Charitrashsa from Center for Public Health and Environmental Development, CPED, Nepal, a part of IPNPO. My question, as I put in my chat box, when I was doing training for the business and human rights, especially for the gender focus, there was a group of people participation from the LGBTQ transgenders and this the people who are not want to identify themselves as a male female, but they are calling as a binary gender. So I wonder how, and they said clearly that in order to show as much as, or in order to appear as much as the person they want to be represent, they said we are using more cosmetics more than others genders like male and females. Also they also said that they have undergone sometimes surgery, maybe involving chemical related surgery, and So I wonder, with this reference, I wonder whether upcoming or draft plan of action GFC has addressed those kind of things, and if yes, it should be included. If not, I think there is a absolute need to address that kind of issue more than the gender specific, especially for the transgender and binary person. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this question and comment, Ram. I'm wondering who would like to respond. So what about taking care of non-binary persons in the Gender Action Plan? Is there a plan or an opportunity to mention non-binary persons? Does anybody want to respond? I think, Miriam, you're raising your hand. Can you just open your mic?
Thank you for, I think this is a very important question, actually. And from what I remember, and Maru will be able to tell us with more detail, there is really not specific mention as it is now. However, we are departing from the principle of non-discrimination. So nobody gets discriminated against for any for their gender identity. From a very national standpoint, we did not go beyond binary in our comments at the moment, because what we want, I mean, and this has to do with my last remark, what we want is for the Gender Action Plan to get through, to be adopted, and then from there to build. Because as you know, we are in a different situation right now, and we have this pushback. So what we want to avoid, and then in these processes, you have to adopt things like consensus, etc., and you want as many countries as possible on board. So that's why we decided to be a little bit more ambiguous, which doesn't mean non-binary is not reflected. So I hope it's not ideal, but I think that's the departing point where we would go from.
Thank you, Miriam, for the strong support, but also the strategic consideration. Mauro, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Minut. Yes, I just want to add on what Miriam's just said. We have the intention of mention gender. The Gender Action Plan is applicable to all genders, of course, and we try to bring some language from the BRS Gender Action Plan when it mentioned gender in all their diversity. We are trying to bring the language that was accepted in another frameworks. However, it has been very contested, the language. As Miriam said, our main goal is also to have successful negotiations, but it's on the governments and stakeholders to come to the proposals and discussions in deep on this specific use of language that is normally accepted or recognized or already used in another frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, good advice also in terms of preparing for the OEWG and further negotiations. Do know what's accepted language elsewhere and be ready to quote that and build your coalitions before you come into the conference room, I might add. I would like to take another question from the audience. There's Dr. Mekonnen Gibeya. So you've raised your hand. I think, Ram, that's an old hand, exactly. So we'd like to hear the colleague, I think, from Ethiopia. Go ahead. We can't hear you, although you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Now,
Can you
yes.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate for the explanation that you have given for us. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can
Can you
hear you.
hear?
If you can be brief with your question, that's highly appreciated.
Okay, thank you, thank you. My course, I'm Dr. Makonnen, assistant professor, lecturer, and researcher here in the home university. Call it Magdalamba University, Ethiopia. My question is, I have developed a proposal on, as I have written on the chat box, building strategic life skills competence among young and middle-aged women from rural and semi-urban communities to ensure understanding about their rights, gender equality, reproductive health, entrepreneurship skills, and climate crisis mitigation. Just mothers, aunts, all the important communities around. So to improve the understanding about women's rights in a certain country context and to develop their entrepreneurship skills, not only that, to mitigate the environmental crisis and mitigation, life skills training is a very important and powerful. So just I need to do this. The only problem is, the project partner and the financial aspect. So can you help me regarding with this concept? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this is a specific question for where to look for financial support for specific work in your country. If you remute yourself, then it's easier for the audio. I'm not in a position to tell you. I think you should look at the GFC fund, but I also think you should maybe join the GGKP group on chemicals and post your project idea there and network with other people who might know and have advice. And I would invite other participants, if you do have an idea, to share it with the colleague in the chat. And now we have 7 minutes left, and I'm wondering, oh yeah, Maru, please come in.
Very quickly, Minu, just to comment that Ethiopia share good experiences and good practices. They have a roadmap on Mercury, and they have this specific action plan aimed at enhancing gender considerations in Mercury management. But this is focused on gender data, gender responsive awareness raising and training, women's access to finance, and formalization of women minors. So maybe approaching to the authorities on environment in your country also could be helpful to reach some of these experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maru. Now, we have 6 minutes left, and I would like to call one more colleague, but you need to be really brief, and that's Edward Kahororo Buyenge. And if we can give him the microphone and you be really brief, then we can accommodate your question. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope everybody is listening to me. My name is Edward from Uganda. We are using a lot of plastics, plastic PET bottles for packaging everything literally in factories. And I assume that there could be some leakage into the beverages we are taking packed out of these bottles. How do we really mobilize? How do we mobilize against this so that we start using at least glass, although very expensive, but much safer than using plastics, because we are likely to be having a lot of microplastics leaking into the food chain. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Edward, the voice from Uganda. Does anybody want to respond to Edward? Do you have a recommendation for him, apart from linking up with Tripti and the IPEN network? Not spontaneously, maybe. Yeah, Ali.
So, I mean, part of our work with investors and companies is to really drive the transition away from plastics that cause harm to human health and the environment. So I think that's maybe even area of focus for this because they are so demonstrative of harm throughout their entire value chain to all vulnerable populations. So I think it's a really good point.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ellie. My job is to look at the clock, and we're nearly at the end time for this webinar. I'm thrilled that so many people were here and participated. I haven't even followed the chat. I see it's become quite long. I'm returning it to Maru to give us information about next steps. And we could see the last slide of that presentation, Karen.
Thank you, Minu. Well, the next step is to keep discussions during the open-ended working group in June 2025. We will keep continuous consultations with governments and stakeholders. Of course, Uruguay is a very good opportunity to keep discussions, go through regions and major groups to present the Gender Action Plan. Of course, all these inputs and feedback that we received today will be considered also to integrate them in the document. Writing contributions, submissions should be directed to the Secretariat, and of course the Gender Action Plan will be continuously feed by all these information and comments from all stakeholders before the conference. I think that is about the next steps, and maybe it's time to close the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maru. We will share the presentation afterwards and also let you know where the recording is going to be available. I would like to thank all of our speakers. Thank you very much for being here and sharing your thoughts and your suggestions is highly appreciated. I would like to thank the GFC Secretariat and the Green Growth Knowledge Platform for organizing this for us all. And I'd like to close with a recommendation. You remember that in 2023, for the gender resolution, we built a really broad coalition before we came to the conference. I think it's time for another one to get a strong gender action plan discussion at the OEWG, and then a strong gender action plan adopted in 2026. Time for multi-stakeholder coalition building again. So be in touch with everybody who's going to Uruguay and beyond. And we hope that we can build something really strong and so convincing that everybody will rush to implement it. Thank you very much for your contributions, for being here. It's been a pleasure. And good day, good evening, good night to everybody, and hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thanks.